righty. Good morning, everyone. I am Lynetta Oliver, the facilitator for this webinar series. You have joined us for the fourth session of instructional design for online and high flex courses. And in particular, we are focused on the supports necessary for a early child care program that is moving online. And so within that context, obviously, there are some considerations for materials and for designing your course so that you can engage students in that realm. And so I will go ahead and get started with today's conversation. We are going to touch on several things today. And then I've left some time toward the end to just kind of make sure that we understand overall what our role is as instructors in online and high flex environments, because it is a little bit different than the in-person realm. And also to give you time to ask any questions regarding this particular module or any of the things that we've been discussing throughout this series. All right. And so I want to make sure that I've provided you with some real strategies that you can utilize immediately in your courses, as well as some things that will help you to continue planning for the future so that your ongoing development with your online and high flex course materials continues to engage and inspire your students to success. All right, so our objectives for today focus primarily on creating autonomy for your students within those classroom spaces, and therefore resulting in impactful learning experiences. We also want to be able to tie the materials that we have chosen to those objectives. And so whatever it is that you are including, we want to give our students the options so that they feel that personal buy-in, that professional buy-in uh, to the experience. All right. And so with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. And hopefully at the end, you have some questions that I can help to clarify for you. All right. I do want to, as previous, make sure that we are focusing on our essential texts. And so we've got a few today. We've started with a series of small teaching, the Blue Book, the initial small teaching by James Lang, and then small teaching for online, where he partnered with Flower Darby. And then this is the second edition of small teaching in general, which focuses even more specifically on those layers of things that you can do in a very, scaffolded, small way to improve your online learning quality and student engagement. There's also the text Ungrading by Susan Bloom, which I love because ungrading is a concept that is fairly new, but that depending on where you come from academically, you may have been incorporating some aspects of it previously. I teach a lot of developmental writing and reading. And so in those contexts, I've been, kind of engaging in ungrading for quite some time, just never to this extent. And so this text really kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities with regard to motivating students to actually want to do better on their own and not be solely motivated by grades. Because I think anybody who's been in education for longer than 5 minutes, we already know that the students have a tendency to just focus on the grade on something and then don't always take the time to go back and find out what they didn't know and what they could have continued to develop. And so this particular concept truly does help with that. And so I appreciate her text. There's also Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, the Zaretta Hammond book. I love it for so many reasons, but when you are speaking of choosing materials for your courses. This text is really eye-opening in that we don't always think about certain elements when we're choosing course materials. And so the Hammond text not only focuses on how people learn and how incorporating small things into our classes can really kind of open up students' learning, but also in how we craft our assignments, and that can help to improve our students' self-efficacy. And so just a lot of concepts that she introduced that I really found helpful. And then finally, the Goldie Muhammad text, Unearthing Joy. Um, Her focus truly is on making students remember why learning was fun in the first place, and addressing a lot of the things that we've got going on both systemically and pragmatically in courses and in educational systems that really kind of do their job in removing the love of learning from those experiences. And so she encourages us to put those back in and gives us strategies for doing so. And so I appreciate all of these texts and all of the ones that that we've been focusing on throughout this series, but these in particular, I think have provided a wonderful foundation for just helping students, to remember, why they have chosen what they've chosen to do and should find joy in it, and why we do what we do in helping our students to achieve their dreams, their goals. So with that said, today's focus is mainly on creating autonomy, and we can do so by utilizing several things. First of all, making sure that we are tapping into the highest levels of student engagement within our online or hybrid classrooms. And we've talked about several of these elements previously, especially with regard to utilizing the technology tools, such as the discussion boards, and having students do peer-to-peer responses, also answering each other's questions and posing questions, and utilizing other technologies such as short videos and the audio notes when giving feedback to students. So we've been, kind of tapping into some of these layers in the previous sessions, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper today in talking about how the materials that you provide students and allow them to engage with also helps to create autonomy. I also have a few practices that you might want to start to, play around with, and then I will, kind of see if anything that you have perhaps done in your own classes to this end. But again, our main focus today is creating autonomy, especially with regard to our materials selection. So I wanted to, before we get into the strategies, just make sure that you are aware that autonomy essentially is the students kind of taking control of and feeling responsible for their own growth and development. Okay, and so if a person says, "Oh, I have autonomy over my day," what that really means is no one is telling you how to organize and prioritize your day. You yourself have been thoughtful about that and made decisions based on what is a priority for you and your own growth and development. And so that's the ideal, right? We want our students to be autonomous learners, and therefore we want to give them that agency, that freedom, and that to empower them to do so. And so that ultimately is the only way to make things truly meaningful for our students. And so in doing so, we, as the facilitators of their learning, we've got to be intentional about how we design our assignments, how we design our courses, as well as we've got to be supportive so that our students can learn in the best ways that make sense for them. And so we want to definitely provide opportunities for them to develop their own self-efficacy. We want to provide opportunities for them to kind of practice, those features of autonomy. And certainly we want to encourage them to collaborate with each other and to be co-creators, because that's those real world scenarios. The classroom should be a microcosm of what happens in the real world, right? But it doesn't always end up being that way. A lot of the times we kind of maintain that level of control, and then students go out and graduate and get into the great wide world, and are shocked when no one is standing there telling them what to do at every step. And so we kind of have to, back away from those practices a little bit in the classroom, especially in higher ed, so that they get more practice with that, so that when they do go out into the great wide world, they can do so with a higher level of comfort, and then also get to be able to see what that level of collaboration and creativity, how that leads to innovation in the workplace. All righty. So before we get into the strategies, I just want to have you think, just briefly about a few things. Um, the first of which is, where do your students currently get to make choices in your course? That's a really heavy question, because a lot of the times, even in the beginning of a class, we might ask our students, why are you in this class, right? And sometimes they just tell you, the truth, which is they said that I had to take it, right? And the they meaning advising or the program or whatever the case happens to be. And, while that is an honest answer, it's certainly not a satisfactory one, because despite the fact that there are things that we have designed as far as programs that are required, the reality is I want the students to want to be in that class because they recognize the value of what it is they're going to learn. And so hopefully, those two things can kind of live in the same universe, but not always, and unfortunately, not typically. And so just kind of thinking about how you designed your course, and whether or not you have intentionally created spaces for the students to make choices in certain situations. That really is at the core of our thinking today. The second question, of course, what types of things are you comfortable having choices for students? And again, that goes back to the way that we learn, as well as we feel most comfortable teaching. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we teach things the way we best learn them, and we don't always think about how the students best learn them. And so if you are giving the students few opportunities to make choices, that is definitely something that you want to kind of revisit for yourself, and try to let go of a little bit of that control, and or just open up, for opportunities to give the students options, right? So that they feel that they have more choices, even if, those choices at least start off a little bit limited. And then finally, asking yourself the truly honest question, what types of things make you a little less comfortable? Again, we tend to teach things the way we best learn them. And so, for example, I teach, English and reading in the developmental realm. And if it's not comfortable for me to focus on math portions or things like that, um, I have found in the past that I would tend to kind of stay away from the things and presenting them in certain ways. And so if instead, we put ourselves, in the students' shoes, and try our best to be uncomfortable, or just to grow a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable, it will truly kind of help us not only to understand our students' perspectives, but also to perhaps learn things a little bit differently than we had learned them before. And maybe that will actually even deepen our own understanding, and certainly will help your students to understand things, the concepts that you're presenting more deeply. All right. So with that said, the surefire way to ensure that you um, are promoting autonomy with your students is to ensure that the materials that you have chosen and the ways that you've presented those materials are giving the students opportunities to make their choices for themselves, and again, to be more heavily engaged and to be dialed into the experience. And so the benefits of those, of course, include the fact that you will have higher student engagement. The students will make deeper and easier connections to the materials and to the concepts and to the experiences. Um, Again, it will give the students more agency in their educational experiences. We want them, again, to take responsibility for their learning and their growth, and so that it's not just the grade, but rather, do I have mastery of this concept, right? We spoke about mastery during our second module. Um, and then finally, you want to provide balance in your courses between what is allowed and what is required, okay? That is a key component of this with regard to autonomy, because even with the student making the choices for themselves, we have to recognize that there are standards to meet, right? We've got programs and outcomes, those learning outcomes that we spoke about during our first module. All of these things, excuse me, are connected to that student's ability to meet those learning outcomes and to meet those standards. But you want them to go on that walk with you willingly. And so giving them the freedom and the autonomy to make choices about certain things helps you to provide that balance for them so that they are willing participants while also maintaining those standards. And so it's just so important things to keep in mind, right? So our first strategy that I want to present you with regarding developing course materials and assignments that will help to provide autonomy for your students is just to give them the choice, okay? And this particular example that I have here relates mostly, again, to reading and writing courses, but you have to remember that a lot of the things that we do in higher education, regardless of the discipline, involves critical reading and critical writing. And so we express or demonstrate our critical thinking process through the writing or through the discussion or through other projects. Excuse me. So whatever it is that you are giving the students, try to give them a choice. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5. For example, my son, who is in college right now, he's in his 3rd year, is in a class where the teacher always says, you must answer 2 of these. And she gives them 4 options. They have to answer at least 2 of them, and they get extra credit for doing a third. And so what that does for the students is any option, because they always have the options in advance, any option that they feel weakest on, they're almost guaranteed to be able to avoid it. Now, does that mean that they are never gonna, address that issue again? No. But what she does when she gives them those options and says that they have to complete at least 2, and that they can do a third for extra credit, is she's giving them autonomy over where they feel their strengths are. And so it's a beautiful thing because he always feels very confident going into his exams and being able to answer quiz prompts, because he knows, okay, I really did focus well on this. And it also, on the flip side of that, lets him know, that thing that I'm weak on, if I had just given it the same effort for that first option that I did for this one, I would be able to answer all of these. And so he is very aware in that class of what it would take for him to have a stronger presence on the things that he's most weak in. And so again, it's a layer of not only mastery of the materials, right? Mastery of the content, but also giving him the choice, giving him the option to be able to focus where he feels that he has the most expertise. It's a very important concept. All right. All right. The second strategy that I have for you here is that when you are doing the groups, especially in the online environment, and having the students, give peer feedback and things like that. You have, typically, especially if you're using Canvas as an LMS, you have the opportunity to create the groups yourself as a faculty member, or allow the students to create their own groups and even to select their own group leader. Excuse me. This works very well if the students have already established a learning community within the course. But, initially, if they haven't, obviously, you can create those groups yourself. Excuse me. You can create those groups yourself. And then once the students have established, a little bit of a community, then you can allow them to have more control over how they pair up or how they develop their small groups. And so you'll start to see, again, a lot more confidence and a lot more discussion kind of come out of that particular the set of choices. Another thing that you want to consider with regard to group work is that it is team building. And so as an aside, no matter how you have set up your small groups, and this works and it is applicable whether the groups are in person, for your hybrid experiences, online, it really kind of doesn't matter. But definitely, whenever you are putting the students into groups, you want to put them into groups for a purpose. Okay. And so I always introduce to them, whenever I'm putting them into groups, a problem that they need to collectively solve. And even in a writing environment, but especially in something like for early childcare, you really want to think about, your overall course learning objectives. And so if I say to students, for their peer discussions, hey, I'm noticing that everyone is having issues to some degree with, making sure that they've developed their ideas. Rather than focusing on, how many commas a person needs, or, how many times they didn't capitalize, or whatever the case happens to be. How about we all look at this as a problem? And I'll give them, some examples, and I will give them some strategies, and then, kind of drop that bomb in the middle of the group for all the groups, or, for all the entire class, and then have them both collectively and in their small groups address that as a problem. And you can align that with your rubrics or however it is that you're grading that particular activity, but it gives the students focus. And so ultimately what they're doing is they are tackling the problem rather than seeing each other as individual contributors to something. They are a collective entity that is addressing a more systemic or societal issue. And so it really does help them to have that buy-in when they're seeing it as oh, this is all of us, that, this is a collective concern, rather than one that's, just Joey's issue or just Ahmad's issue, right? That we're all needing to focus on this. And it helps also, again, for them as they are giving each other feedback and addressing the strategies and things like that. They are all moving towards mastery, as opposed to just one or two who might, be struggling moving towards this, and everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. I try to not have them do their own thing very often when it comes to that group work. Again, because you want to also utilize their time effectively. So just as a recommendation. So another thing that you want to kind of keep in mind with regards to um, the the strategies that can be used to create more autonomy for students is as you're thinking about what the students are going to be doing, you want to pose something that they're all collectively thinking about, and try to have everyone moving to that end. And so, one model for this is Northern Illinois University's team-based challenge. They utilize this model for all of their institutional-wide um, uh, uh, problems that they pose to students in programs and in specific high impact courses, such as their college composition sequence and things like that. And so this is, again, just a recommendation as a model. But what it allows you to do is what I was speaking of on a smaller scale. This allows you on a larger scale to do what we want to do in small group work in individual courses. And that is have all of the students, keyed into or focusing on a larger issue and working to bring their strengths and their expertise in wherever it fits in to support that thing. It also kind of helps the students because it allows them to be experts, where we often will kind of hyper focus on weaknesses. A lot of our conversations with regard to student development is truly deficit based. And I find that problematic. Zaretta Hammond talks about deficit based thinking in the culturally responsive teaching and the brain, because just focusing on someone's weaknesses, doesn't give them the opportunity to develop their strengths and make them even stronger, but it also hyper focuses on things that might actually be out of the student's control, such as institutional or structural biases. And so if you instead, when you're, kind of putting your students into small groups or teams, help the students, just kind of focus all together on solving the same problem, but bringing their different strengths to the table to help solve that problem, then that helps to facilitate that learning in a larger scale. And also, again, to promote that understanding and what we have always promoted with our students, that notion of lifelong learning. It promotes that level of inquiry that is ongoing. And so we want to do that for students. We don't want to shut them down or having them believe, oh, I can never do math because whatever. Instead, if your strength that you bring to the problem involves focusing on what you've been good at, then that's what you bring, to the problem. And so we are responsible for facilitating our students' learning and their growth. And we want to do so positively and in a way that's going to encourage them to continue. And so if we just shut them down and say, well, you're not good at this because you really just aren't good at the order of operations or whatever, we have kind of denied ourselves and those students the opportunity to grow as a result of focusing on their strengths. And so again, this is just a model, and so I just want to make that recommendation as a way, again, of building your students' autonomy and to making sure that when you design your course materials and choose those materials and the tools, that you keep that in mind. Okay. Another strategy for building students' autonomy is to have what is understood or referred to as specifications grading. And with specification grading, what you do is you set certain specifications for achieving proficiency with a learning outcome or with a concept. And what that does is kind of helps the students determine, how far they want to go with certain things, and they already know what's required of them. All right. So with specifications grading, I um, I use a lot in the writing classes because when the students turn in their drafts along the way, they just get the points, right? We have some other terms that are connected to specifications grading, like low stakes assignments, or, again, with writing, we draft or we do activities that aid in the pre-writing and things like that. Those are all components of specifications grading. But with this type of grading, what you're doing is you're holding the students accountable for meeting certain milestones, but they don't have to try to achieve mastery for all of those milestones. Some of them, it's just you're aware of them, you're doing it, next thing, right? And so there's some scaffolding involved, and you really are focusing on the big picture, which is by the end of this, major lesson, the student should be able to at least functionally get here. It may not have, the style or the nuance, of somebody who's very high achieving in this area. But at the very least, if you've done these things, you're going to get an 80% or whatever the specs that you have um, set for those standards. I also like specifications grading because it allows for some room for students not really getting it. And so they're not graded on whether or not they got a concept, but whether or not they did the thing. And so we talked in the third module about how sometimes when you have scaffolded activities, you can very easily see where a student's understanding is starting to be challenged. Specification grading allows for that. And so again, you want to give the students a little bit of leeway to be human. Maybe they've had a bad week, or maybe this particular part of the concept challenged them a little bit more than they anticipated, and they didn't do well. But you'll be able to give them that room because they turned it in, because they did the thing, to still, earn and to move towards that outcome, right? But along that same line, you also have contract grading. And so contract grading is where the students decide where they want to end up. And so with specifications, you, the instructor, have set the limits for each level. With contract grading, the students have set the limits for each level, and they are the ones who are deciding what they want to do in order to earn where they want to earn. And so contract grading, basically they said, I am an A student or whatever the case happens to be, and I am willing to do all of these things in order to earn that A. And so you've got, all of the steps and the quality of each step clearly outlined for them, and they just move towards that. And if they hit them all, then they've earned an A. Again, the difference between the contract grading and the specifications grading is with contract grading, the instructor has, the say so over what constitutes an A, and, the students move towards that. Whereas with specifications grading, the students have decided, okay, I want to, do all these things, and you are hoping to, move them along in it, and wherever they land, they land. Okay. All right. So slightly different, but again, both options giving the students autonomy over their overall results. All right. And then another strategy that I have for you is syllabus co-creation. And I really do love syllabus co-creation when it comes to giving students autonomy in courses, because this allows not only for the students to kind of decide which processes and policies speak to them and are going to be most supportive of their learning, but also I think on a lot of levels, syllabus co-creation kind of removes a lot of the cultural biases from policies, because the students will, let um, in a very, engaging way, um, any policies that don't meet with their life needs, right? And so you may have a policy in your syllabus, your original syllabus, for example, about the number of times a student can miss an in-person class. And several of your students may be parents with children who are school aged. And so they may say, well, yes, I signed up for this 9 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. However, my kids are in this school district and they have, so many, in-service days, or if they get sick or whatever, you know, can we instead have this policy? And so it's things like that that help you to be more culturally responsive, and to, again, to try to it will help you to kind of remove some of those biases, in the policies that you may not have intended, but they exist because, again, we have often developed the policies based on what the institutions we work for have already presented, or what we have had to navigate ourselves in our past. And so some of those policies, while they may have worked or we may have successfully navigated, they may indeed present barriers to students. And so students' lives are complicated, especially at the community college. And so we just kind of want to keep those things in mind. And so I always have the students um, uh, take a look at kind of standard course policies, and then we go through and we talk about what will work and what won't, and what needs to be adjusted. And then we make the adjustments, and they feel like they have definitely more input into the course and their own success. And it is also a whole lot easier to hold them accountable for those syllabus policies that they have all contributed to. I very rarely have to remind a student of what our policy is when we've co-created the syllabus because of that. And so it's a beautiful thing. All right. So just as a summary for this portion of today's conversation, I just want to just remind you that you are the subject matter experts, right? And that the students are the ones that we are bringing into the fold. And so you still have both the authority and the foresight to know what the standards are. And what we are doing is helping the students to navigate the space in between, and to help get to meet and become masters of those standards. And so again, moving toward mastery is the goal. But we do want our students to have some freedom in choosing how they navigate this space, with, of course, some limits, some guidance along the way. And so we want to give them, options for choosing, so that they have high engagement and they have buy-in. But remembering that there is a space between what is allowed and what is required. And so you want to keep the course learning objectives at the forefront of your conversations with students, as well as you want to keep the overall goals as in the profession at the forefront of those conversations. All righty. So as we move on with the next portion, I do want to mention that, there are benefits to making those connections between the student's autonomy, and the course materials that you have chosen to include. And so whatever materials you choose for your classes and for specific lessons, just kind of keep in mind that, it's about more than just memorizing the material, right? You actually want to help the students make real world connections to these concepts. And so I always recommend to faculty that if it comes down to adding more content that is based on the discipline, or adding more opportunities for students to think about scenarios that have them apply the content, I would definitely lean toward the latter. Okay, having them memorize things only goes so far, because as a student I can attest, students will just chunk and dump, so they'll remember things just long enough, excuse me, to pass the test, and then they've forgotten about it. Whereas if they have an opportunity to actually understand some things, get access to resources, and then apply that understanding, they will remember it much longer and much more deeply. And so you want to give them those opportunities to think critically about the material. And again, to utilize that material for the usefulness of the content and how it works in those contexts, rather than just remembering things. And so we want to move them towards mastery. And we want to, again, the goal is to have students who are able to think and to process and to apply and to communicate effectively what they have understood. And because again, things do change, right? If I had a nickel for every time, Pluto changed from a planet to something else, right? We have these ongoing conversations, and so the facts in that regard, based on our understanding and how we're defining things, definitions are always rhetorical. Those things may change, but our ability to think and critically process, those are the things that can be developed and that will serve us in the long term. Okay. All right. So just as a brief aside, I want you to think about um, kind of what you're doing. And I've asked these questions, and we don't have a lot of participants online today, so maybe we won't take a moment to share out, but to just think about briefly what you could do in your in-person classes that might work well in an online environment. Because again, we are thinking about online and high flex. And so with the high flex, sometimes the students can come in person, sometimes they are working online, either utilizing an OWL setup or on Zoom or something like that. But whatever the case happens to be, we've got to make adjustments in our course materials and in our delivery of that content so that it's engaging in both situations. So just ask yourself the question: do you provide opportunities to help your students process the new information? Again, a relevant question, both in person and online, but it's a little bit more challenging online. What elements of your activities help to improve the student's motivation? In an online environment, the answer may be a little bit dubious, right? And then, of course, how can you assist the students with becoming more confident with these activities? Okay, and so do you provide them low stakes opportunities? Do you give them the chance to choose what they would like to do, as opposed to only giving them one option and everyone's doing the same thing? Do you give them opportunities to be creative in how they complete certain larger assignments, just things like that. And so something to consider. Okay. All right. So I have provided for you just a few strategies to help your students just kind of navigate this space. Because again, um, we really want to think about how we can help our students to increase their engagement and to have more autonomy in the classroom space. So I have a few here, and then we'll also talk about other um, resources that we can utilize. And so my suggestions with regard to helping the students to be more engaged and to have higher motivation and to improve their level of autonomy overall is that you incorporate activities that activate their prior knowledge. And so what I mean by this is maybe giving them, um, journal responses or feedback responses that allow them to basically be the expert in the room. Because, just in speaking universally, every human being is an expert in something, right? I remember when my son was very small, he would go around collecting rocks. And without my knowledge, he was looking online at different types of rocks and, you know, different things. And I'd be like, hey, why do you have all these rocks in your pocket? And he would go, oh, well, this one is and he would use the name. I can't tell you what any of those names are. He would use the name and he'd say, you see, it has holes in it. And that means that this and this and this. And then he'd pull out another one. And this one is and I was just like, oh my gosh, he's a little bitty, expert in rocks. Like, and it was just annoying me because they were showing up in my washing machine. But he was very much engaged. And so when you give students that opportunity to be the expert in something, it really does help, again, to uh, improve their confidence in themselves as learners and as facilitators of their own understanding. And so, um, you start there, and then that will, increase their efficacy along the way. Um, yeah. So just having said that. All right. Another thing that you can do to help the students, again, is to review or apply principles of backward design. We've been talking about that since the very first module, but when you begin with the end in mind, uh, as you design, your course materials, your course activities and assignments. You are essentially looking at the overall learning outcome and in reverse order, reverse engineering how the students can then meet those outcomes along the way. And so in doing that, you will see, whether or not the students, can get it, where it becomes a little murky, where you can make some small teaching adjustments to improve the content or the support that you're providing them, all of those things. But it just takes those few steps to move yourself backward and to be able to support the students in that way. You can also, when you're helping the students learn, embed within the activities some tools that they might not utilize themselves naturally. I like to use concept maps, especially with writing, but even in, for example, an early childcare environment, you can definitely take a look at different models and help the students, with images, fillable images that they themselves can put in, when they are looking at certain concepts. And that will truly help them to be able to understand the material and master the concept. And so just kind of thinking about that you want to provide them some tools that might not be, high graded things, but again, will help them to understand how the concept is working. And of course, you want to incorporate things that are going to help the students relate what they're doing in the classroom to what they're doing in the real world. And so just like the example that I told you about with module 2, with my colleague who it was explaining to the student who was working in CTE why he was doing this in an English 101 class. And he actually ended up doing that same thing in the workplace to convince his workplace to buy this expensive piece of machinery. Um, she was teaching him in the class things that he could then apply in the real world. He didn't see the purpose of taking this composition class until he actually had to do it. And then he was like, I'm so glad I learned this. But we have to do a whole lot of convincing along the way with students as to why. And so if you build the why into your assignments, it'll make it easier to convince the students that they should do these things and that they are actually going to be useful to them. And then finally, with this particular slide, I would definitely recommend that you help the students to create their own learning communities. Um, they're often referred to in different ways. Sometimes they're referred to as personal learning networks, but I'll show you what I mean in just a minute, okay? Ultimately, what you're doing is you're creating a community of learners. And so in that regard, that's helping the students, again, gain in their own self-efficacy and to be more motivated to continue. And so before I give you the visual examples of all of those, I also want to mention that when you are considering your course materials that you are using for students, that you strongly consider, your institution may not allow you to adopt it, but you strongly consider pulling in OER materials or choosing an OER text or even writing your own OER text. And OER stands for Open Educational Resources. And so again, this particular module is about material selection and how that helps with student autonomy. Choosing an open education resource for your course materials truly does help the students because it, first of all, it improves students' day one readiness, right? How many times have we taught a class where it's taken us 2 weeks before we could really dive into the material because the students couldn't afford that $200 to $300 to $400 textbook? Well, if you have an open education resource, whether it's for the first week or a couple of class sessions, or it's for the entire class, it helps with that day one readiness so that you can hit the ground running with the course content and the concepts and being able to support the students. But there are OER textbooks already out there and available to be utilized through OER Commons and other online resources. And so I recommend OER whenever possible because the open doesn't mean the O isn't for online because you could have actual physical hard copy OER materials as well. But the open means that you're utilizing your librarians at your institution to help you make reading lists, or you're using an open source text. And with the open source text, especially, you essentially have an electronic version of a textbook that can be utilized. It can be embedded in your learning management system. Again, you can have the resource links on your library page, whatever the case happens to be, but it removes the barrier of cost for your students as well as removes the barrier of disconnect between when a student has access to the course materials. So increasing that day one readiness overall. And so just a consideration, I'm not promoting any particular OER text. I'm just saying that I have found that especially when students are just starting off or when they struggle with finances, OER can be very helpful. All right, so to get back to the recommendations for supporting students, again, we've got some frameworks that we've been talking about, but I just want to remind you of as a review, not only of this portion of the module, but also this webinar series overall. And that is that you definitely want to utilize the principles of UDL or of universal design as a framework for how you present your key concepts in your courses and design activities, assignments, and materials. UDL is wonderful in that regard because it's equity-based, and once you have employed some of the principles, it's actually pretty easy to use throughout. Doesn't require a whole lot of effort, but it definitely addresses the majority of students' needs. And so I just recommend it. And as a framework, it is, again, quite user-friendly. I also remind you to implement principles of backward design. And so when you are planning your course and your program and your activities, just kind of think about, what's the overall goal? What should a person be able to do, demonstrate, or know by the time that they are done with this particular phase? And so those backward design principles are truly useful because if you begin with the end in mind, you will definitively be able to stay on track. It's easy to get off track, unfortunately, when we're just doing things piecemeal and it's not clear how it's connected. And so backward design helps us to stay connected, to stay focused, to scaffold appropriately, and always to be able to tie what we're doing to the why that is the end. You might also, again, include concept maps or other graphic organizers in your courses to help students to be able to understand how things connect. Okay, and so when you are, designing your assignments or your activities, think about, anything that already exists out there that you can provide a fillable form for your students so that they can then begin to put the pieces together. That would be helpful. Okay, again, you don't have to do it for them every time. Start to allow them to do it for themselves. Again, increasing that self-efficacy and to give them, more autonomy in the class. And then finally, you want to encourage the students to develop their own personal learning networks. So we want them to be lifelong learners, but we also want them to start to put together all of the pieces that would be required to help them to become, more to master the materials, the content, and to become better professionals in their chosen disciplines. And so we want them to, create those learning communities, right? And be able to draw on other subject matter experts so that they can, then begin to have that growth, to experience that growth and self-efficacy as well. So with that, just as a reminder, we want to have them tap into their prior knowledge, whatever they had before that they are bringing to the table, that they can then, use as a springboard into becoming, facilitators of their own learning and their own growth. We do though, again, because we want to, navigate that space between what's allowed and what's required. We do want to provide them some organizing frameworks or some organizing principles. But we want to remind them that they're learning these things in the classroom, whether that classroom is in person, hybrid, or online fully. We want to encourage them to make connections, and anything that they are not capable of fully connecting while they're in our classroom space, we want to leave that with them as something that they will continue to explore even beyond that particular experience, because life continues to happen and the learning should continue to happen as well. So overall, giving the students, more autonomy to, figure out what they want to do and how far they want to go, so that they can achieve mastery. But you want to definitely um, give them those opportunities again to bring in what they've previously understood, because they are the experts. You want to model good habits for them, and also being able to address the structure. You want to help them to continue learning and make connections between the classroom and the real world. And you want to continue to give them those opportunities to have conversations about their disciplines and to develop their own learning networks so that they continue to grow and tap into their own professional development. So, as a measure of leaving you with some nuggets, some takeaways from this entire series, I just want to remind you that as online instructors, you are constantly going to be working to improve your courses, whether it's activity by activity or assignment by assignment or course by course. The work is really never done. Just like with anything, we're constantly growing. And so as we encourage our students, we want to model that ourselves. Um, I would also encourage you to take an online course yourself. If you've never taught online, take an online course yourself, because it will definitely remind you what it's like to be a student, but it'll also provide you some context. You'll be able to see very quickly what works well and what doesn't. And so even if it's not the best experience, you will know, well, okay, I just don't want to do those things. And so you try something different. Um, and so that's definitely helpful. I would also recommend that you utilize whatever resources your institution provides to become certified to teach online yourself. Some people like to do the QM, the Quality Matters model, and that's fine. There are other models out there as well. Canvas, for example, has a bunch of, through Canvas Commons, a bunch of resources that they provide to assist faculty with becoming online certified. Some institutions develop their own online training, and that's fine too. But whatever the case happens to be, start to add some of those certifications to your own experiences, so that you can grow your own confidence and autonomy as an online instructor. And then finally, I want to thank you for taking this class, because hopefully this webinar series has invited you to be open to being inspired by other people's recommendations. And so with that in mind, again, the work is ongoing, and the improvements are ongoing. The revisitation of key concepts is ongoing. And so I just want to thank you for being open, and as always, invite you to ask questions and to seek more support. And so I'll stop talking for just a moment and ask if anyone has any questions or thoughts regarding today's session, any of the pieces, or any of the other modules that we have gone through throughout this series.
And you can put any questions or comments in the chat, or if you have a working microphone, feel free to unmute yourself and participate that way as well.
All righty. Oh, have I ever used a choice board with college students? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the choice board allowing the students basically with regard to the learning outcomes, kind of choose how they want to proceed through the class. Yes. They are a little, because it depends on the learning management system that you're using, how well they work. I did it before, and the institution I was using it for, they were using Moodle, and so I think it was a little bit clunky. I was actually contemplating this summer, re-implementing that because the institution I'm at now utilizes Canvas, so I'm wondering if it'll work a little bit better. But yes. I mean, as with anything, it really just depends on how you implement it. But yeah, definitely, that would give the students a whole lot of autonomy, right? Not only in the how they want to produce final projects, but also in how they engage with the materials to learn the concepts along the way. Um, that's it's depending on your teaching style, uh, some people can allow that much variety. I don't know if I'm comfortable enough offering that much variety all the time. It depends on the course. My literature courses, I would feel a whole lot more comfortable with it than with composition, but it depends on what you're teaching. Good question. All righty. Well, thank you so very much for your time and attention today. As always, the sessions will be available to you, as will the slides. Zuccarello and Associates, I'm one of the associates, is always here to provide professional development opportunities for faculty in the virtual environment. And so we thank you for your support. And thank you so very much, Jessica. I truly appreciate that you have been here each and every time. And spread the word. They are recorded, so anyone who wants to revisit these concepts certainly can. Thank you again.